Hello and welcome to this next part of our FPS setup. So this is just a generic 3D project. It's got the standard assets pre-installed. So we are going to import a few assets of our own, and so I'll right click here, import new asset, and go to my desktop. Now we're going to bring in our corridor in here, and we're going to bring in our arm rig, and then we're going to create a folder. We're going to call this textures, and we're going to bring in or create a new folder. We'll call this FPX, and we'll put these two guys into that folder. And then in our textures folder, we're going to import new asset. I'm going to import these three here. These are our brick textures. Going to import our concrete. And we're going to import wood. Okay. And we are going to import our hand texture. And is there anything else we need? No, I think that's it. Okay. So let's set ourselves up here. So we'll start with our corridor. So we'll bring that in, and it's only very, very short, but we're going to just, for convenience, double the width and the height. Now, as you can see, when it's come in here, we have transparency in our shaders. So we're just going to create a couple of new materials. So I'm going to call this floor, and this floor material is going to be the concrete. So this is brick, so it's this one here, so concrete, so we put that in there, this in there, and that one in there. So this is our concrete here, and we can change how shiny it is. We make it a bit kind of wet looking. Then we'll create another new material. We'll call this the walls. And again, we put in our brick, which is our diffuse. Then we bring in our specular map for shininess and our normal map for bumpiness. And that looks about right. And then last but not least, we'll make a new material that is wood, which will go in our door. And we will use these three. So 1, 2, and 3. And that looks just fine. Okay, and then over here in our corridor, we will use so this is our walls, so we'll put that there, and this is also a wall, so we'll put that there. It's going to be, oops, our we'll use the floor on the roof, and also here. And then on the door, if you look here, we've got a mesh renderer, so I'm going to drill down here into the door till we find the mesh renderer, and then on that we'll put our wooden texture. Now that wood is very shiny, so let's go in here and dampen that down a bit there. Okay, and the walls here are also super shiny. So we'll bring that back a bit. Okay. Now, I'm going to delete this main camera, and I'm going to bring in another camera. So I'm going to bring in my standard assets. I'm going to go to characters, and then we're going to go to first person characters, prefabs, and then this one here, rigid body FPS controller. So I'm going to drag and drop that in there, lift it up a bit, and drag it back. So it's kind of, it's not quite in the corridor, and now it's in the corridor. Now, what we want to also create there, we've got a directional light, so we're going to change that to being a point light. And we want the point light, again, in the corridor. And then we can change how bright it is. But more importantly, I want to change the environmental light. So I'm going to go to the main camera, which is in our first person controller. I'm going to turn off my skybox and make it a black color around me. And I'm going to go window, rendering and lighting settings, and again do the same here. So I'm going to turn off my skybox from my world, and then I'm going to tell it it's a color, and that color should be black. So then the only illumination we'll have is this light, and if we increase its intensity, so we just have more control over how things are going to look. Okay, so this is our little world that we're going to play in. So I'm going to press play, and I'm going to just go through the floor. So not very good. So we need to give some collision, some physics to the floor. So we go back to these objects here. So there's the wall. So we'll go add component, and we'll go to physics and a mesh collider. We'll do the same with this wall. Add component, physics, mesh collider. We will select the roof, add physics, and where's my mesh collider? There it is there. And the same with the floor. Most important, mesh collider. We'll also go back to our door here, and we'll add physics, mesh collider. So now when I press play, I should fall and stop here on the ground, and you can see it's all a bit wet and shiny, and I can look out into the darkness and then look back around into the corridor. And we can worry about size and positioning, and I can use my WASD to move forward and back in this world, and I should not be able to go through the walls. I should have physics. Okay, so it's going to hit escape and stop that. So that works. So we have our basics of the world and FPS setup. So next what I want to do is I'm going to bring in this other asset, this arm rig. So I'm going to bring this in here. And I'm just going to put it for now into the world. We'll worry about how big it is and etc. in a minute, but first of all we just want to make sure it's colored in correctly. So, and if we look here, we've got our armature, and inside that we've got our arm. This here is our cube, and we've got a hand and a cloth texture. So the cloth texture is just a solid color, so I'm going to go create material. I'm going to call this hand, and I'm just going to drag and drop this image in here, this diffuse image, and I'm going to try and change how shiny it is. I don't want it to be shiny at all, really. And I'm going to put that here, and then I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it I don't know, blue. And this I'm not going to put an image into, I'm just going to give it a color. Okay, and when I go back to my cube here and it says material, I'm going to take blue here and put it in number 2. And I'm going to go back to blue and make it less shiny. There we go. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to position this relative to the camera. Okay. And now this is the important bit. I want, when I press play here and I start moving, I want the arm to be my arm. I want it to follow the camera. So I'm going to take this and just drag it on top of the camera, and now it's a child of the camera. So let's press play and see that. Okay, so when I move my arm, or when I move my camera, my arm moves with me. Okay, so this is progress. Now, if we look in the arm here, we'll see that there are two animations. And these animations we made in Blender. You can see other videos on how to do that. One of them is an idle cycle, and one of them is a fireball. So let's activate them and get them going. So I'm going to go over here to my animator, which is where we can control animations. And I need to make an animator controller. So in this FBX folder here, I'm going to go create animator controller, and I'm going to call this FPSrig. Now, so in this FPSrig here, I'm going to bring in my two animations. So the one I want to play by default is the idle cycle. So I'm going to bring that in first, and it's going to be orange to indicate that it plays first. And then I'll bring in this fireball one. So in the idle cycle here, I'm going to right click and go make transition, and then make a transition back. So, and then I need to set up the parameters for how I move between these two animations. So up here, I'm going to have in my parameters, I'm going to create a Boolean parameter, so something that's true or false, and I'm going to call it fire, F-I-R-E, all lowercase. And then here, I'm going to say, go from the idle cycle to the fireball cycle, so go that way, when fire is true. And I'm going to turn this off here, has exit time, so it doesn't need to play all the way to the end of the idle cycle before it goes across. It'll just immediately do it. So you need to turn off has exit time. Otherwise, it will finish this animation before it goes across. So if you press fire, you may have to wait 8 seconds or 9 seconds or 10 seconds before it'll then play this animation. So we want it to play it instantly. And then this one here, we want it to go back when fire is false. And again, we don't want that to have any exit time. We may end up turning this back on, so we may want to press spacebar once, have it play this full animation, and then go back to the idle cycle. So actually, for now, let's leave that turned on, just so we can see the difference between a transition without it turned on and with it turned on. Okay. So we have our parameter, and we've set up our conditions over here, and now we just need a script that will be able to access this. But before we do that, we need to have a quick look here. It says, this is my arm rig here. Over here on it, it says controller none. It's got no controller. And this here is the controller, so we need to drag and drop that in there. Now, just by dropping that in there, we have told it that this is the default animation. So if I press play now, I should get my idle cycle. So I'm not touching the mouse here at all. You can see the fingers kind of move. It's a very, I won't say it's subtle, but it's so the hand is animating, and it's just going to play that animation on a loop. So I'm just going to escape here for a second and click up into this window, and you should see okay, so it's played the animation and then it's stopped. Okay, that's interesting. So let's try that again. So we'll press play, and you can see up here it's playing the animation that we can watch, and it's going to reach the end, and it's not looping back around. So let's see if we can have a look at fixing that. Let's go to my idle cycle here, and we can press play, and we can see it was working. And over here we've got okay, we've got our idle cycle, and okay, and we've got our transition to this guy. Okay, so let's go back to the armature rig, and we're going to look at these animations here, and we're going to turn on loop. So we don't want the fireball one to loop, but we do want the idle cycle one. So I'm going to say loop time. I'm going to turn that on so that it will loop. Okay, and then I need to apply that. So now let's see it working. So again, we can watch up above here. Watch the blue line moving across the idle cycle. It's going to play, and then it should loop back and play itself again. There we go. So it'll just keep playing continuously. Okay, so now we need to set up a small script to put on the character, and that script will control when we can fire, when we can't fire, when it'll play the other animation. So let's have a little look at how we would get our how we get that to work. So let's just create a folder over here in our assets. Create a folder, and we'll call this scripts. Okay, and then we're going to create a new C# script. And we'll call this player control. Okay, so we have a player control script, and in we go. And it's saying, oh, we should fix some of our texture, so we'll just hit fix now. It's to do with normal maps, so we won't worry about that too much. And is mono develop opening, so we'll just double click on this again and see if we can get it to launch our software. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to have a quick look at our script. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a look at how do we input. So we're going to do spacebar, and we're going to have to load in our animator. So we're going to have a public animator animator. So in order to tell the script which, if you can imagine, we have this thing here, it's called FPSrig.controller, but I could have 10 bad guys on the screen at the same time, and they'll all have different controllers controlling their animations. Some of them could be running away, some of them could be firing at us all at the same time, so they all have different controllers. So I have to know in the script which controller I'm talking about. So this here is a variable, and it says I'm going to drag and drop the controller that I want to control into my script here in the inspector. So we'll see that in a minute. So we're just loading that up as a variable, and then down here I need to stipulate how this works. So I'm going to go if, and what's my if? So it's input dot get key, and then the key we're looking for is spacebar. So if I press the spacebar, something's going to happen. So I'm going to open a curly bracket and close curly bracket. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to say animator, which is what we've declared up here as the name of it, dot set bool. So what's the bool? The set bool is up here, so we're going to set fire to be true. So we're going to set this guy here fire. That's the bool we're looking for, and we're going to set it to be true. So that's our input. And then what we can do is we can say else. So if I'm not pressing the spacebar, else and then open some curly brackets. Control C, Control V, set it to be false. Okay, so we'll just we'll save that, and we'll see what ghastly errors we've made in our scripting. Okay, and it will tell, so player control error on line 16. So let's go and see what's on line 16. So, oh yeah, so I'm missing a second curly bracket. So that's fairly fundamental. And it's telling me I've got an error on line 17. And that makes sense because I haven't closed that. So they should go in pairs. So okay, and then that one is one too many. And we don't need that. Okay, so let's go save and go back in and see what other beautiful errors we get. Okay. Oh, so there's nothing there that's going to stop us from playing our game. Okay, so let's take this and put it on the rig. Oops. And that didn't work, so we grab and drop that there. This is called player control script, and it's looking for the animator. So what animator are we trying to use? The animator we want to use is this one here. Now it's not letting me drop that in here, and that's because it wants the object that it's on as opposed to just the rig. So how we do that is we click this little circle here, and it's the arm rig that I want in there. The arm rig animator. Okay, so let's see if that works. So if I press play, I am in the game. I can look around. Oh, and I've accessed the jump input by using spacebar. So I may just use a different key. So let's go back into mono develop here, and we're going to say, what key? We'll say F, the F key. So if I want to use the input here, so I'm going if input.getKey F, and then from F we can should be able to fire or trigger the animation anyway. Okay, so spacebar. So when we're using the rigid body controller, the some of the inputs. So to show you here, we've got project settings and input. So some input is already defined. So jump is already the button that it uses as a spacebar is space. Okay, so let's press play. Okay, so we press the F key and it will play the animation. So I can press F at any time, and you can see up here, if I just hit escape for a second and get my mouse, so you can see up here for a moment it will flash that it's true, and it's only true while I press the key, which is much shorter than the animation. The animation is 30 frames, which is just over a second. But because we've said has exit time, so it'll have to finish the animation before it'll go back, then we're getting the full animation. Otherwise, we would have to, if I stop it here, we could change our script to say input get key down. So while I'm holding it down, the F key, set it to be true. So let's do that. Okay, and we'll find go file save, and let's press play. So now when I press the F key, okay, it should be true for the duration. Actually, let me just click up here and okay, all of these errors, let's get rid of them. Okay, so that's how we do that. And then in our next class, or next in the college, we'll look at instantiation, which is when I press the F key and getting the fireball to appear and fly down the corridor. So that's our next step, which will be a fun one.